That's the sound of the Hydrasynth. Well, in fact, the Hydrasynth Deluxe. This Hydrasynth followed us back from Berlin. I don't know if it was actually the demo model there, but we got it almost as soon as we got back. Those of you who don't know, Berlin obviously was the big super booth show. We posted 75 odd videos there, lots of really interesting content. Please do take a look. There's links all over the site, so I'm sure you can find it if you need to. But this is the new sort of flagship from Ash and Sound Machines, the Hydrasynth Deluxe. Now this is a much bigger beast. It uses the same engine as the original Hydrasynth. I've reviewed that in full. I'm not going to go over the whole engine. And the original Hydrasynth, it's a digital synthesizer, really nicely designed by Glenn Darcy and the team. Glenn is a synth designer that you probably recognise his name if you're into that sort of thing, which, if you're watching this, I presume you are. He was big with Arturia. I went over to Ash and Sound Machines, and together with the team, they made this really quite a special synthesizer. The Deluxe basically doubles the engine, because the original was only 8 voice. This gives us essentially 2 full Hydrasynth engines. So 16 voices. If we're in single mode, we get 16 voice polyphony. If we're in multi-mode, we get 2 8 voice either layers or splits. And of course, the extra keyboard length gives us this room and the much talked about shelf. Now this shelf is actually a really nice idea. I'll take it off and we'll get onto that first, because I know you probably want to know. You screw it in. If I come back here, it's a very chunky piece of metal, and it just sits on the top, and it's got a nice bit of rubberized business, so you can just put it straight in here and, you know, put synthesizers, put mixers, put whatever you want on top of here, and you utilise that extra space, because all of the business happens at this end. Essentially, the control surface and the controls for the Hydrasynth Deluxe are exactly the same as the original Hydrasynth, including the touch strip. Now, the touch strip this is an interesting synthesizer in many ways, because it gives us poly aftertouch. This 73 key bed is fully polyphonic aftertouch, and then we get the ribbon strip. And this is it was based on the concept. I mean, it doesn't sound like the CS80, but the Yamaha CS80, legendary performance synthesizer, and they were kind of going for having that ability to have that level of control. And the poly aftertouch in the synth engine is really nice. It adds quite a lot of extra expressivity and all of those things. Bit more about this. Essentially, this is a bigger case, built very much the same way. Nice aluminium end cheeks. The big difference is we have an extra stereo output, so we can have the upper and the lower on separate outputs. And the other big difference is the fact that we have this section has been added, and this is the control for the layering and the splitting. So in single mode, we end up with a 16 voice Hydrasynth. So basically any patch in here will play with 16 voices, which is a nice thing to have. So 16 voices of polyphonic aftertouch. We're going to get some really big sounds in here. I'll play some examples a little bit later. And then, of course, we go into multi-mode, and we end up with an upper and a lower. We can control them together, but if we press the lower, you can see that all the controls go blue, the LEDs go blue. Press the upper, they go yellow. So that's how you know which one you're editing. And then if you press them both together, all the controls are common. So it's a really simple sort of paradigm for editing. But each layer can have up to 8 voices, and the layers can be either split with a place on the keyboard that we can define very easily, or layered, so we can have 2 sounds, one on top of each other. And what this does is open up an enormous amount of extra sound design. Don't forget, there's a lot of really excellent synth engine and modulation matrix, and we've got that ×2, literally, and they're not sharing the effects. The effects are separate for each engine. Obviously, if you're in single mode, then you only get 1 engine, but you get 16 voices, so that's the way it kind of works. So I'll start in single mode, and the piano piano I've got is called Deluxe Piano RA. RA, whoever you are, nice job on this. It's not really a traditional piano, but it's quite an expressive thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand on the sustain pedal. A slightly twisted piano, but it's got some really nice sweet spots in it. And you can just hear 16 notes of ringing. Quite pleasant. Lovely. So now, if I go into multi-mode, is if I press Shift and multi, we can see that this is a dual mode, so it's a layered, and the sort of parameters that we can set here are actually kind of handy. One thing that's handy, we can set the upper and lower octave offsets separately. And other controls, we've got balance of the sound. We can also set the sustain pedal to be lower, upper, or both. Same with the ribbon, pitch bend, and the mod wheel, and also with the arpeggiator, which is kind of handy. Change the balance, so on the lower tone we've got this kind of more percussive sound, and then on this one it's more the sort of sweepy phased pad. And the other thing that's kind of cool is if we exit this, the macros can be assigned to whatever level. This is sort of global macro level, so we can set it to, so if I go to macro edit, you can say which tone each macro affects, which again is really useful for programming up some kind of performance-based thing. Let's go to, there's another sound here, which again is, this one's a bit more Hydra Orchestra, it's a bit more interesting, and we've got, again, on this guy, if I come back, Shift, Multi, we can see this is a key split, splits at C2. It's like a sort of timpani, and then up here, this is more of a stringy sound. And if we look, I think the sustain pedal is on both, but I could actually set that up so that I might want to just sustain the upper sound. I think what's happening, yeah, we've got the split and we've got a crossfade. So if I actually take the crossfade off, there we go. So now that was sort of merging up the octave. And then the upper sound is the whole rest of the keyboard. Okay, one thing to mention about this synth is it is actually listed as bitimbral. In fact, it is. You have an upper and a lower, which can be addressed on separate MIDI channels. So externally, you can take those both individually. But it's worth mentioning at this point that the keyboard it's only got a regular local on-off mode. So if we go into system setup and we can switch local on or off. Now this applies to both layers, but we can set the receive and transmit channel of each layer separately as well as the global. But what this actually means is the keyboard will always play both layers unless local is off. It would have been nice to be able to have the keyboard address a single layer and then an external input address the second layer if you want, because you might have a dual keyboard setup. But it's not viable. You need to have something externally, have the MIDI going out and then sort of back into the unit. It makes it a little more complicated. I spoke to Glenn about this and he said it is actually much more difficult than it seems to create this kind of split local off kind of concept, because you end up with all sorts of MIDI feedbacks. But I just wanted to mention that in case it was something that perhaps you were hoping was going to be ready out of the box. It is entirely possible that this might be fixed in a future firmware update, but I wanted to tell you about it now. Here's a patch. which does some kind of interesting things. I'll show you what's going on here. So lower is this kind of beat, which is using a rather interesting LFOs to trigger the different elements of the sound. Really nice. I thought it was an arpeggiator, but it's all done in LFOs. Quite nifty, but that's beside the point. The point is, some keyboards, not the original Hydrosynth, but some more other keyboards, allow you to have this kind of patch overhang where you're playing the notes of the previous program, change program changes, and it hangs over and doesn't re-trigger until you get to, another note trigger on the new sound. This one doesn't do that, but what you can do, which is kind of handy, if I just press go on here, and now what I'll do is I go to my upper and I hit browse. I can actually change programs. While maintaining either side of that split. So it means that I can actually interchange sounds sort of from within a performance. Although I couldn't find a way to do that via program change from an external source. Programming change only seems to be a global thing which will affect the overall programs rather than individual programs from within a multi. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to use your increment buttons or the select, but it does give you that opportunity. You could always arrange, the patches in a way if you did need to keep one thing going and change another hand or another part, that would work fine. Okay, one other thing I wanted to look at was the arpeggiator, because I did mention earlier that it's possible to have them separate. So let's just get a sound thrown up for that. So in this sound, got this really nice arpeggiator which is running on the low end of the keyboard, and on this one it's more of a piano-based thing which is running on an arpeggiator but at a different rate. Anyway, I won't play any more because it's easy to get lost in this, but that shows that it's quite easy to represent, have two interconnected arpeggiators using the same clock, but running at different phrases, different rates. And that actually is something not all sort of split layer synthesizers make it that easy. I remember the Moog 1 when I first reviewed it, may well be fixed in firmware now. It was quite hard to synchronize those things together. And also I think the Rev 2 on the initial firmware as well was just a little bit didn't quite tie up, but it's very easy to tie this together. It's not all good news though. I think one thing I would say is many of you will think this is really handy to have a shelf here, and it certainly is. It's a nice little utility. I can't help but feel that perhaps this area could have been used. Maybe we could have had the pads from the desktop, the Hydrosynth desktop, or some other additional control stuff. I mean, I suppose that would have meant that the price would increase, because really this is very reasonably priced. It's only 50% more than the original Hydrosynth, but you're getting 100% more plus extra keys plus the additional output. So you do get quite a lot. And if you're a performer or you want a larger keyboard, keypad, that really 73 keys certainly goes a long way. I mean, it's certainly an octave longer than most. It actually feels pretty good, and I suppose what I'm saying is it seems like a very reasonable deal considering what you actually do get. Anyway, that's it for this time, and thank you very much for watching. I'll probably post a little more sort of sound exploration stuff on our Patreon, which you're welcome to go over and join. Sonic State, patreon.com/Sonic State, and you can access as well as all our content ad-free. If it's posted monetized to YouTube, you get extra patches, audio. There's also Sonic Talk pre-show and ad-free versions of that as well. But that was the Hydrosynth Deluxe, which actually, again, for the money is very reasonable and certainly adds a lot of things that people were asking for when the original came out. And it's still a great synth. There's just more of it. Anyway, that's it. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.